You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramie. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for August 24th, 2017. Summer almost over. Say it ain't so. But today, to talk about, well, it's back to school too when summer ends. We have Travis Clark of Top Drawer Soccer to do our annual NCAA preview. Travis, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing pretty good. Pretty good. We have Dwayne Rollins, of course, on the line as well. I'm Kevin Laramie. Travis, NCAA, every year we usually start by asking you broad questions about recruitment. Which university did get better in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. But, of course, if we're looking at the men's side and the women's side, Stanford is sitting atop our recruiting class rankings heading into a new year. Both schools have reloaded in impressive fashion, and I think it's particularly notable on the men's side due to the fact that you have a program coming off back-to-back national titles and sort of this unprecedented chance. I shouldn't say unprecedented because I believe a school has won 3 NCAA titles back in a row, but probably back in the 50s or 60s. I'd have to verify that, but they brought in a slew of impressive players that will bolster a team that has 9 of its 11 starters back. So that's, obviously there are programs around the country. You have your Wake Forest, North Carolina's, Maryland. They've brought in the players that they need, kind of depending on how many returning starters there are or what have you. The one men's program that stands out and should be pretty interesting is Indiana. It's a somewhat of a perennial power. I believe they won I believe it was a 2012 NCAA title. It was either 2012 or 2013, but Indiana's recruiting class, they brought in 3 or 4 of the best forwards in sort of the 2017 group, and I will be curious to see how quickly those guys can kind of get out of the gates, and because one of IU's problems has been just being dynamic and scoring goals up front. So, with that in mind, it's a program to watch for sure outside of the usual Big Ten champ Maryland, which they've dominated since moving over the past few years. But I think IU could give them a run for their money this year.
I just want to go back to Stanford for a second because I want to put in perspective what they're trying to achieve this year with the last 2 years of success. If you remember, well, you probably remember, but our listeners, hopefully they remember late 2010s, late 2000s, early 2010s, the famous Akron dynasty with Caleb Porter as a coach, and you had Zarek Valentin, Darlington Nagbe, and company. That crop is now playing in MLS and other professional leagues in the entire world, and it became a great success. And with hindsight, we see it with rose-colored glasses, but we see it as it was a hotbed, and it was something special that happened in that team that developed those players. Is it a little bit of the same situation that's going on at Stanford?
I think it's a bit different. The head coach there, Jeremy Gunn, obviously they have a big personality behind the program, a coach that sets things up so that you can easily move players in and out. Obviously, Stanford has the advantage in the recruiting game because you can really chase after those top cream of the crop student athletes, whereas Akron, they have to do a little bit more working, a little more digging. Kids aren't going to Akron because of the academic piece as well as the soccer piece. I mean, it's a fine school, but when you're comparing that, it's a little bit of a different gap. So I don't necessarily think it equates in the same way, but there are a lot of similarities. Obviously, Akron's possession-based mantra is still kind of well known, still used pretty much under head coach Jared Embick, with Caleb Porter obviously coaching in Portland. But what Stanford does differently, I think, is the system isn't necessarily tactically driven, as opposed to just sort of I don't know if this makes sense, but win victory driven. Whereas they can possess the ball, they can knock it around during the regular season, but when knockout soccer arrives, they're built to score goals, keep play really tight defensively, poach goals on set pieces. I believe last fall they scored from the run of play in the second round and then didn't score again. They scored from set pieces and then obviously triumphed at the College Cup by keeping 2 shutouts and winning on penalty kicks. So, their goalkeeper Andrew Epstein is gone. He's now serving in the U.S. Peace Corps in Africa. So they'll have to replace him in goal. And then Brian Nanasinkum is, I believe, with Sounders 2 in the USL. But other than that, they're coming back very well stocked. And then obviously they add that cream of talent to the sort of the top of it.
Travis, let's keep it on the men's side for now. And obviously most of our listeners are mostly interested in prospects and who might be able to take that next step in the MLS Super Draft in January. Can you give us 3 or 4 players to really look forward this year that might have the chance to make an impact next year in Major League Soccer?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, the effectiveness of the draft is something that I'll always bring up when people ask me that question. And I tend to try to pick out some of the younger guys. I do think there's an intriguing number of center backs that could make the jump and sort of be the guys, like a Steve Birnbaum type. Maybe they're not going to be, the national team. Birnbaum's obviously sort of fallen off the national team radar, but he was on it. But Stanford has a center back, Tomas Iliarche, who's a pretty highly regarded player. He's someone that I could see coming in. There are a couple of guys from smaller schools who are really fantastically named. You have a Wyatt Omsberg up at Dartmouth. The Ivy League to MLS some jump is nothing that I'm going to put money on, just simply because they have an even shorter schedule than the rest of the D1 programs because they start a week later. But he's someone 6'4". He's big, moves pretty well. He's come from a more obscure background, being a native of Maine. Yeah, he's someone that I think could end up, sneaking in there, make a roster, then kind of see what happens. Then a third center back from Loyola Chicago, Grant Stoneman, another sort of big hulking type. Those 3 guys face the questions of, how are they going to move against the better, more dynamic athletes that they'd be facing in MLS. But those are guys that, when you're looking at sort of the senior class, that's someone you can arrive on. Other seniors include Brian White, a Duke midfielder. I'm not a big fan of the Blue Devils and sort of what they put together in terms of style of play, but White's someone who's really asserted himself this summer in the PDL. So he's somebody that I would keep an eye on. There are a handful of other guys, Jefferson Caldwell in goal, another senior, John Gallagher, a Notre Dame forward. Notre Dame guys are reliable when they sort of hit that next level. And, while they don't have them happen that often, but guys like Harry Shipp come to mind when you're looking at that. Another senior forward, Albert Ruiz from Florida Gulf Coast, a Spanish kid. It'd be interesting to see how he gets along. He was a Mac Hermann Trophy finalist last year, scored a bunch of goals. And then, you look at some of the, underclassmen, Generation Adidas types. Gordon Wild's obviously the name a lot of people are going to keep track on. The Maryland forward from Germany, scored a bunch of goals. I think was offered Generation Adidas deal. Didn't end up pursuing that route, obviously. Up in Syracuse, midfielder Mo Adams. I think he's been battling some injuries during preseason, but he had a huge impact as a freshman and is another guy. Then a couple other kids in the ACC. You have Emma Tuasami from Wake Forest, and then Edward Apoku, who's over at Virginia. 2 Right to Dream kids, tricky midfielder types. Final third guys could play out wide, perhaps. Last name I'll throw at you. Francis Atuahene, another PDL standout. He plays at Michigan. Has a sort of the speed dynamic play that you'd want when you're looking at guys that could be projected at the next level.
Travis, we had Alexi Wallace on yesterday, and we asked him a question about managers in MLS, and he sort of suggested that he thought the next wave of Major League Soccer managers would sort of be big names, would come from overseas or whatever, would have a professional sort of pedigree to them before they came in. But there is a history of Major League Soccer of guys coming from the NCAA and having good impact in the league. Do you see anyone in the NCAA right now that you think might step up and be that next manager to make the jump from college soccer to the pros?
I have a hard time projecting this sort of thing simply because the comparison in job security and the level of pay is decent enough that a lot of these guys aren't going to be pressed. It's not that they're not ambitious. It's that MLS tends to favor the sort of former player types. You look at Jay Heaps, you're looking at Ben Olsen, guys that, and I know their cases are a little more unusual, and I do believe that I do agree with Alexi to some extent. One name to keep in mind is, I don't want to say he's obscure, but he may not be known. Jamie Franks. He is sort of like the Julian Nagelsmann equivalent in the college game. Pretty young guy. Took over Denver's program, I believe, last year when their head coach Bobby Moose went to Wake Forest. Jamie's a guy that's obviously had a lot of experience. He was a player, I believe, at Denver, an assistant at Denver, and then's taken over the program, took him to the College Cup. So I think, you see 2 or 3 more years of sustained success, and perhaps he's the type of guy a little earlier in his career looking to make that sort of ambitious jump to the next level. But I do think that there's going to be that obstacle of the going out and looking at the Tata Martino types. So he's one name. I think some of the more older mainstays are the guys that, they have their established rhythm. They're, it's not that they're not ambitious, but, the comfort and the lifestyle and the, I guess, less intense demands of a college job are probably more appealing than at this point trying to make that jump to MLS or a professional level.
If we look on the women's side for a second, Travis, a lot of Canadian women still to this day go to the NCAA for sponsorship, for scholarships, and for a level of competition that they cannot necessarily find anywhere else. Mix it with education, and you got yourself a winning combination. What are the biggest name, and what is the feeling in the United States when players like from Canada comes in and get some scholarship across the university spectrum?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because you look at the influx of, obviously foreign players have played a big role in the men's part, whether that's they're coming from Canada or Europe or South America, in sort of helping the men's programs cope with the departures and the trend of the American more elite players to skip college altogether. But on the women's side, I'm not sure if there's a sort of a negative reaction. I think that the top programs are now realizing that, well, hey, to compete at the absolute highest level, we need to bring in players from all around the world, and that's not just Canada. That's also, you're looking at a lot of Europeans. I feel like a few more Europeans are trying to make that jump, looking at opportunities, whether that's the big ACC type programs or Pac-12 programs or sort of elsewhere in Division 1, 2, or 3. So I don't think there's a negative perception or reaction. It's notable that last fall's national champions, USC, obviously bested West Virginia, which is known as one of the more main landing spots for the premier Canadian talent. But I was actually doing a little bit of prep work for this and discovered that Memphis has 15 Canadians on its roster. So, that'll be a team for to keep an eye on this season, along with West Virginia, obviously, that still has a pretty prominent representation.
Well, let's continue on the women's side, Travis, and sort of you gave your overview on the men's side. Who do you see as the top few programs on the women's side?
Yeah, there's obviously programs. A lot of the mainstays are sort of staying near the top. I think USC, the champions last fall, will have a bit of a drop-off because they lost so many players to the NWSL, and so many of their players were seniors that were a big part of that team. But Stanford, again, as I sort of mentioned already and touched on earlier in the program, has a good group. UCLA is a name to also keep an eye out for. Obviously, Jessie Fleming is the arguably one of the best players in college soccer, full stop. Whether or not it's Canadian international or American. So she's started the season off in, tremendous form. They scored 10 goals over the weekend. I think she was involved in half of them. And, they've been showing the ability to play a pretty nice possession game, which really, really suits what she can do. And, she can do a lot of damage going box to box. And I think another player there, obviously, is a Canadian international, at least at the youth level. I know she had a couple of full team caps, Kennedy Faulkner, though she missed the opening weekend since she was at a U20 camp. But, surveying the country, Florida State should be up there. They actually also added a Canadian late, Gabby Carl, who I believe has a few full team appearances under her belt. You guys can correct me if they're wrong. Duke is brought back center back Rebecca Quinn, who missed a lot of 2016 with injury. They're another team that should compete. Obviously Penn State's, your North Carolinas, they're going to be up there too. And I do think West Virginia is going to be an interesting package. Obviously, Kadisha Buchanan and Ashley Lawrence are playing professionally in France, but their Canadian spine, if you will, is still pretty strong with a couple of Americans up top. And Riley Foster in goal, midfielder Carla Portillo, two very experienced, very capable players. And then, Bianca St. George and Amandine Pierre-Louis are both two returning players from two Canadian players at the back that give them a lot of experience and depth and quality that I think could have them, maybe if they're not in the College Cup run again, they should be able to play well into November this coming season.
On the men to watch that might have some Canadian in them in a minute, but let's talk specifically about Jessie Fleming first. Just how good is she, and does she have the potential to be, the best player when it all stands at the end of the year? Can she win the player of the year in the NCAA? Like, what is her ceiling this year?
Yeah, I definitely think she can. I'm not sure what I think the one thing you could say that hold her back would be involvement with the Canadian national team. If that keeps her out of enough games, that will end up ultimately detracting, fair or unfair, which I would say is a little unfair. That could end up detracting just from her numbers when it comes time to voting. I certainly won't hold it against her, so she'll be in the running for the top soccer player of the year award. But I think, one of her main competitions is Andy Sullivan, the Stanford midfielder. And I guess the edge that Jessie has is that she's healthy. Sullivan's coming into the season off an ACL tear. And while she played in both of their games over the weekend, I think they'll ease her into competition. That gives Fleming the opportunity to kind of, work her way, get used to the schedule and just kind of pull the strings. And I think that you look at her ability to make things happen in the run of play. And if UCLA is able to kind of have a great season, a top 5 finish, they don't necessarily have to go to a College Cup, but if Fleming leads them to an Elite Eight, her name is going to be very much near the top of the list. And she definitely has the sort of the front runners in front of her to open up space. If you go back and watch some of the highlights, she's making those late runs into the box. She had a really nice volleyed goal in the first game of the season. And I think that her ability to put up those numbers is certainly going to do a lot to strengthen her. If she's double-digit goals and assists and UCLA has a top 5, top 10 team, she's going to be up there for sure.
All right, that's and with that Canadian question that I always ask you every year on the men's side, any Canadians to watch for, any dark horses out there that might have a chance to break through and have a great season down in the NCAA?
Yeah, there are, I don't want to say more and more Canadians making the trip down, but they're always the hardest to find, especially because you got to look at guys that, I start with the pro academies, and obviously their approach is a little bit different. Yeah, someone like Alex Comcia comes to mind. He's probably not, I wouldn't necessarily flag him as someone with pro potential, but he started a ton of games last year for North Carolina. He's a guy that is flexible, played in the back 3, will probably be one of their starting center backs, barring an injury. And so he's a guy that Canadian fans should get to know. Maryland's starting goalkeeper could very well be Dane St. Clair. It'll probably become more clear as the season progresses, but he's an Ontario product kid that I believe joined the Terrapins a couple years ago. They obviously lost their goalkeeper from a season ago, who is a senior and no longer on the team. He's a guy that he's a size sort of make up the ability, I think, to compete at very, very and do very well at the college level. What question is, Can he be consistent enough and that kind of a thing? There's some other interesting names too, guys that I'm sort of tracking down at the tail end of my preview season. Penn State brought in a TFC player that you may know, Ethan Beckford. I'm not sure, how he projects and how he'll do, but I know that Penn State has a lot of holes to fill on the field. So he's someone that at least gets playing time early on in the season, a guy that I've never seen play, if I'm upfront about that. But like I said, you look at Penn State's roster, there's a lot of gaps for him that he can fill in. One of those gaps is a transfer. Dayon Harris moved from Penn State over to UConn. So he's a guy that I like. He's a little bit of a spark plug up front. He sort of has that athleticism and pace to cause problems for college defenses. And then another name that sort of is forcing his way onto my radar for this season, Alistair Johnston. He's an outside back from St. John's, a kid that played a significant amount of minutes as a freshman, and I think will come in and make a big impact once again as the Red Storm look to do well in the Big East.
All right, Travis, tell the listeners how they can follow your work and how they can follow your work, Travis.
Yeah, they check out topcoresoccer.com all season long for all of our college soccer coverage, club. Obviously, it's U.S. focused, but we're always trying to make inroads into the Canadian audience. And follow me on Twitter, Travis M. Clark.
Thanks again.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Dwayne, yesterday, just after the show, of course, because that's when news breaks, just after we're done talking about the sport, Wayne Rooney announced his international retirement. He is done with the Three Lions.
That's probably for the best for England, because I think
for England or for Rooney?
Maybe for both, because he allows him to go out on his own accord, because it would have been a distraction. I think probably he understood that. It's also, you look at sort of where his career is right now. He's come back to Everton, obviously. Look, I take a step back. I'd be objective about Mr. Rooney. I can, he's had a decent career. He has a lot of critics for, he never took them to the next level. He was never really. Look, I mean, you look at those commercials they always put out before the major tournaments. They always put him up the same level as the Ronaldos and that in the world, and he was never there, and that was probably unfair to him. But that's England, so it's probably best for both parties that they step aside. There's no distraction heading into Russia next year for England, so they can move ahead. And they probably would have felt pressure to name him had he not announced his retirement his own volition. So we'll tip his hat to him and wish him well at Everton, so that he can, finish out on his own accord. Because, he's had a decent career. Wayne Rooney has never become the world player that I think England fans obviously wanted him to be. But, his career is nothing to sniff at, right? He's had a good run.
Alan Shearer mentioned yesterday that it's a very similar path too, right? Their careers are quite similar in a way. Yes, sure, traveled a little more than Rooney. Rooney basically played for two clubs, Everton, Manchester United for the brunt of his career, and back to Everton now, and actually playing very well. And Alan Shearer was mentioning yesterday how the fact that he took this decision gave him 3-4 more years of club soccer, because he could focus solely on the club and maintain his playing level for that period of time, and able to keep performing on a high level. And if you're looking at Rooney, the way he's performing now, the way he's probably thinking, okay, I need to focus my energy for Everton if I want to be able to play like this all the time, it kind of makes sense. It's kind of similar career too when you look at it. Alan Shearer, England Premier League legend with Newcastle especially, but other clubs as well. And if you're looking at Rooney, it's a similar career as if you look at it with hindsight.
No, for sure. And as I said, look. we all know where my partisanship lies. So obviously Rooney has been a thorn in the side that way for a while. But you can take a step back and look at what has been a decent career. And there's a lot of, if you look at England as a whole, they're having some success with younger players right now. They're starting to produce a few more than they have in the past, and having success at the youth level. Can they convert that moving forward? Who knows? The history would suggest no. And history would suggest, as people have demonstrated before, that I think England, people have too much expectation on how high they can go at the senior international level. But, I think it's a good idea for older players from that last generation to step aside and allow for the next generation to sort of emerge and see whether they can take that program up to the heights that a lot of people would, in England obviously would like to see it out. I don't know if the English could handle winning the World Cup. Do you think they could? I think that might completely defeat their entire self-defeatism narrative. That might be something strange to see. And where would the jokes come? How could we make jokes about losing in shootouts if they ever got good? I mean, come on.
Oh, when though? Because they have to host it to win it, no?
Or they have to host it. And now that there might be video review, I don't know whether they could ever repeat what they did before. Because
that's a good segue. Video review last night. Maybe for the first time, maybe since its inception in Major League Soccer, felt kind of intrusive yesterday. A few, especially the San Jose game versus RSL. We've seen it a few times during that game. I mean, it kind of felt intrusive. So maybe we're seeing the kinks here and there now.
Well, my opinion is well stated on that. In the first couple of weeks, I must admit that the time delay issue that I worried about hasn't been there. But it just comes down to, are we over? Like, is it too pedantic, right? Like, do we need to be so obsessed over perfection that we sort of lose sight of we lose the plot? And time will tell, I guess. Obviously, it's going to sort of emerge into more leagues, not less. I understand that. I just hope that it can evolve in a way that is not intrusive, and that we aren't having conversations like this, more and more moving forward. It's not, I'm not a fan of it. People know that. We'll see.
Now let's talk quickly about the games last night. Let's talk with the best team in the league, the Toronto FC. Toronto FC. What a free kick. That free kick in the beginning of the first half by Giovinco mystified Andre Blake, mystified Philadelphia, and everybody in the stadium. Everybody was expected to go left to try to get over the wall, but Giovinco had other intentions, and he literally just froze the keeper. Top shelf. Nothing Andre Blake could do because he just looked at it. It was beautiful.
It has a chance to be goal of the week for sure. Everyone, where I was in the stadium, I along with other people around me, sort of pointed to the opposite corner. He's going to try and hook it over the wall. Like, it was a perfect position to do that too, but he, as you said, completely threw the change up in. And that's, if we're going to criticize Giovinco, and criticizing Giovinco is really about finding fine lines to sort of speak to. And one criticism some people have had is that he kind of is predictable in where he places most of his free kicks. He does it very well. MLS record holder all time in terms of free kick goals, so you can't really complain too much. But this is a case of maybe he's decided to mix it up a little bit, and if he can start to mix it up consistently, it's dangerous. And he's been pretty good the last couple of weeks, and seems to be rounding into form at the right time. And last night, Kevin, that game, I told you off air, it was like like how cats sometimes play with mice. Just they don't kill them; they just kind of bat them around until they're done with them. It's kind of how the game felt.
Well, yeah, they're doing this with the entire league right now, Toronto FC, and clearly the best team, clearly the front runner in the Supporters Shield competition, Toronto FC is for sure. In that second goal, like set pieces too, like Vasquez on that corner, Hassler puts a head on it, and it's 2-0. Hassler back-to-back game with a header goal.
Yeah, that's a strange one that no one saw much coming from. That speaks to sort of, think about how they found Hassler. Everyone was kind of sort of going, what? When they signed this guy, because he didn't exactly come from a big club. He didn't exactly come from a big country. I mean, it's rare that a guy in the footballing world comes to Canada from a country that has, less reputation than us. So, good for him. But it sort of speaks to their ability to identify talent and identify hidden gems. And if they can continue to find guys like that contribute in the way he has already, then you have to be worried if you're the rest of the league. It's 53 points, Kevin. 53 points for TFC right
We're
now.
in August. That was like 51 is like the mental barrier for playoffs. Usually if you go around 50, 51 in Major League Soccer, you're in the playoffs. We're in August, and Toronto has 53 points.
Yeah, I think they're probably pretty safe for the playoffs. I think that's not necessarily going to be an issue. If New York is red on Friday, then you start to wonder whether the Shield race is over too. I mean, right now they're New York, if they win on Friday, New York FC, I should say, if they win on Friday, will still be in it for sure. Like Patrick Vieira comments aside, but if the Red Bulls take all 3 points and you're looking at 7 points clear, really it's just win your home games. You've got the Shield, and that's start to focus on maybe even rotating down the stretch. This is a club that people are talking about in terms of their potential to be among the best regular season teams of all time, and we'll leave the playoffs aside for now. But certainly with only 3 losses in August, well, what more is there to say? We said this on Monday. Like, there comes a point where it's hard to say more about them other than, wow, they're pretty good, aren't they?
One thing I wanted to say, and we'll finish on Toronto, and we'll finish the show quickly. We have to go early today. And when you're looking at Bono, and I just saw the replay on my TV while you were talking of that miss by Altidore that was close in the first half. And it all started with like a pass from Bono. Bono was under pressure, just stepped back. Instead of just booting it, passed it, and then it goes from the defender to Rosario to the midfielder. The midfielder goes on the flank, centers in, and there's a goal-scoring opportunity. It's kind of interesting how Bono, slowly but surely, it becomes the goalkeeper of choice for Greg Vanney, because main reason is he can play. They can play from the back, that expression, and it kind of starts with Bono.
Yeah, no, he had a decent game for sure. And I know that the play you're talking about, we were actually awaying in the crowd. That was one of those plays that had like 12 passes or something before the final shot, and unfortunately, it was just a bit offside. But remarkable. It was a remarkable game all around. There's really not much more to say than it was just one of maybe the most complete home performance in the regular season I've ever seen, and I've been to 98% of TFC's games all time. Right?
Yeah.
It's such a good team, and they're able to do it. The game Sunday, it's going to be one hell of a game because Montreal's hot, as we know. We'll talk about this more as the week goes on, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing it, Kevin, and I'm sure that it's both clubs are going to be up for it. It's going to be one good game on Sunday.
Oh yeah, and one of the games Montreal had, Atlanta had in hand on Montreal was last night. DC United winning 1-0 against Atlanta, and it's the first time ever that a team wins back-to-back game against the same team without actually scoring a goal. Own goal, scored both of DC's goal over the last 2 games against Atlanta. 1-0 on each cases. But for Montreal, in the playoff race, because, it's the playoff race. It started. It's pretty much almost over. Atlanta lost this game, and it's a comfort for Montreal, giving him some space to breathe. And Atlanta, we talk about those games in the hands. They have to win them. They didn't win that one.
Certainly, that's one that Atlanta is not going to be very happy that they dropped. Certainly, a lot of people probably would have assumed that they would have got those points there, which says a lot about the fact that an expansion team would have been viewed so heavily favored over DC United, who's now won 2 in the trot. So that's good for them, and something that allows them to sort of good for them. They haven't exactly been ripping it up, but here we go.
They needed it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're chasing, but you still want to, I guess, build some momentum for recruitment or whatever. But I'm always been a little skeptical on Atlanta's. A lot of people are sort of penciling them in as top 3, top 4 in the East because of the great home schedule they have down the stretch. I'm not as sure about that as others are, simply because I think as we get into the grind of the end of the season, this as good as this team has been at times this year, it might start to show, and we might have saw a bit of an example of that last night.
Quickly, the other score, a cracker of a game in the Texas Derby, 3-3 between Dallas and Houston. Real Salt Lake 4, San Jose 0. That Hudson River Derby went to Salt Lake. Vancouver, Seattle. Vancouver with the late equalizer, Alfonso Davies, with his first ever Major League Soccer assist on Freddie Montero's tying goal late in the game. And to finish last night, Portland 2 and it's just Coloradoing. Portland 2, Colorado 1.
Yeah, Colorado, and obviously a good night for Vancouver overall when you look at the results in terms of their playoff hopes. Only a draw there, but they got the result in the other games that they probably would have wanted. I don't know, Chalk. The West is really hard to figure out right now. There's just a lot of. It's like the East the last couple of years. They flipped this year. The West is that the conference that has sort of a couple teams at the top that look like they might sort of be the better teams, but by and large, it's just a whole steaming pile of mediocrity for the most part. And I think sort of we saw more of that last night. RSL is really interesting how young they are and how they're coming on a little bit lately. So they're an interest. I think they're a little too far to make any push into the playoffs, but they're certainly a very interesting team to look at for 2018.
At least they turned around their direction, and now they seem to be going the right way. And yeah, it might be a little too late for 2017, but at least you've started the process for 2018 a little early, so that would give you at least some advantages heading to next year.
No, for sure. Yeah, this idea of going young is something that's kind of new in MLS. It used to, you didn't really see like rebuilds in the way that you're seeing now. And I think that's just a reflection of the maturity of the league in terms of the top end talent. Like in the past, when we talked about this with Alexi yesterday about how the parity was a little tighter in the past, it's still there, but RSL really stripped it down. They still have, Kyle Beckham and guys like that hanging around. But for the most part, this is a team that went really young this year to try and build in. And I think we're looking at a longer term project. And that's something that if you're RSL, you have to do if you're going to continue to be successful. And there's been some questions about the change in management there, but maybe they do know what they're doing. And certainly, as I said, it's a very interesting team to look at for next year, even down the stretch. They have an outside chance to get in, and if they do get in, they're going to be very hot when they do.
All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more soccer. Today, we'll talk a little bit more about what happened this week with the Champions League. The draw is later today, so we'll talk about this tomorrow. Who's going to face who in the group stage of the Champions League? We'll know that later today, and we will dissect it tomorrow. You can follow Dwayne on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramie. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.